hopefully won't get any complaints from area kennels saying that my voice is disturbing the dogs. That has happened in the past. Apologize for that in advance. But now we will get started with our charter school WISE training. And the first thing we're going to talk about is WISE IDs. And what is a WISE ID? So the official technical definition is on the screen there, but basically what a WISE ID is it's a unique person identifier. We have to have a way to uniquely identify each student in the database, and the way that we do that is with a WISE ID. It's a 10-digit number that is unique to a student. And as we'll discover later on in the presentation, also to staff members. The WISE ID, once upon a time in years past, used to be called a WSN, if you hear it referred to as that. That's probably from an old-timer who's been around a while and remembers back years ago when it was a WSN. But any student who had a WSN, their WISE ID is exactly the same that their WSN was. That was also a 10-digit number. And so the link that's on the slide there will give you much more information about WISE IDs, but that is basically what you need to know is that it's a unique identifier. What we also keep track of in our database is what we call a local person ID, and we'll go over that in more detail later on, but a local person ID is how your student information system uniquely identifies a student, and the two systems need to know your SIS needs to know the WISE ID, and WISEdata needs to know the local person ID so that the information exchange can take place when we have the student data being pushed to us. So taking a step backward and getting started. So there are several DPI software applications that you will need to have access to in order to do WISEdata reporting. One of those is the WISE ID application. There are others, WISEdata Portal being one that we'll talk about, School Directory being another that we'll talk about, and those are all accessed primarily through what we call a WAMS ID. And WAMS IDs are used by multiple state agencies, so not only just by DPI, but by Department of Transportation, Department of Revenue, the DNR, all kinds of different state agencies use WAMS IDs, and they're actually administered by the Department of Administration, or DOA. So we at DPI don't have the ability to reset passwords, but there is an online method for account recovery that you can go through, and also for setting up a WAMS ID initially, which is what we've got outlined for you on this slide. If you notice in the box there, the WAMS guide is a very helpful link on the DPI website that will give you detailed information on how to sign up for a WAMS ID, change your information later on if you need to, and those types of things. So that's kind of a handy bookmark, handy site to have bookmarked. But everyone who is going to be using DPI applications should have a WAMS ID set up. And the WAMS homepage is noted there in a link. And once you go there, you'll select the self-registration link, and you will provide the required information, which is creating an ID and assigning an email address to be used with that ID. One thing we like to point out is that for people who have an educator license, it is kind of important that the licensing side of things be kept separate from the data reporting side of things. It is perfectly okay to have two WAMS IDs, one with your personal email address that you use for licensing, and one with your school email address that you use for WISEdata. And that is what we suggest, just so that the two IDs can be kept separately. If you would happen to move to another school, for example, or another position where you would be reporting WISEdata or doing schoolwork for another agency, you could change the email address on that WISEdata WAMS ID, keep your licensing one just the way it is, and you wouldn't have to worry about the two crossing over. If you do have a problem with your WAMS ID, Our help desk can help you with very basic questions, but if it's a very complicated issue, we may have to refer you to what's called Help Wisconsin Support, which is a help desk at the Department of Administration. So we are limited at DPI with what we can do to help you with WAMS IDs, but we will do all we can for you always. So now we'll look at the WISEID application. And the reason we're starting with this is that because before you can send data to WISEdata, you need to have the WISEID process run. And this is because like I mentioned a moment ago, the WISEID needs to be matched up with the local person ID in your student information system. And we have a file download and upload process that I'll describe as we go along here. All of the SIS vendors that are certified for WISEdata have this process built into their system. And so if any of this, if you have any questions about how this process works on the information system side of things, their customer service should be able to help you with that. But the basic high-level process is, in your information system, you generate a file in the CSV format. And that file, the SIS has programmed so that it fits into our WISEID system. So you'll take that CSV file and upload it into the DPI WISEID application. Some algorithms and things will be run against that file. And if there are any errors potentially in the file, you'll be told that. And if there are any potential matches, you'll be told that. We'll talk about those in a moment. And then once there are no more errors or potential matches, then you will download a file from the DPI WISEID app, upload it back into your SIS. And what we've done with that process then is we've matched those two unique identifiers together. So we've got a WISEID and a local person ID on the DPI side, and a WISEID and a local person ID on your information system side. And then you'll be able to send data through for those students. Until that process is run, you won't be able to send data to WISEdata. There just won't be any students available to be read on the DPI side of things if you don't run that process first. It's also important to run the WISEID process periodically throughout the school year. As things change, you could have students that come and go, and you want to make sure that those local person IDs are being attached to any new students that you have in your system. So it's a good idea. We suggest weekly, but it's a good idea to run that WISEID process frequently throughout the school year just to make sure that data is being sent for every student that it should be being sent for. So this is an example of the WISEID home screen or the landing screen. There are, I will point out that there are some improvements and some updates being made to the software. So once October-ish rolls around and you log in, it might look a little different than this. The functionality will be the same. It'll just be some of the look and feel of the screens that might be changing a little bit. So I just wanted to throw that word of caution out there, but we will be changing those screens a little bit in the very near future, I'm told. On the welcome screen there, you'll see if there are any notices or information that we feel that you need to know regarding WISEID. That'll be put on that screen. And then also if there are any alerts that you need to know about, those will be in that orange bar at the top. So in this case, there are, and we'll talk about these in a minute, there are change request notifications that need this agency's attention. Over on the left is the navigation menu, where all of the different features of the application that your user role gives you access to will be noted. This menu is one of the major things that will be changing in the new release, so it'll be more an across-the-top type of a setup instead of over on the left-hand side. This is the search and edit screen. If you are in the WISEID system trying to find a particular student, this is how you would search for the student. First and last name are required fields, and then any other information you can put in there will narrow down your search. One of the key pieces of information that we have for a student search is the birth date, the gender, the suffix, if they're a junior or a the second, the third, the fourth, one of those, and of course the WISE-ID. If we know that, that will give us an exact match. If you need to change information on a student, that will create what's called a change request. And the reason we have this process is that when we change information in the WISE-ID, we want to make sure that we're keeping on file the information that is the most current, the most correct, and in the case of names, the legal name of the student. So if we were going to change the last name from Jones to Smith, that you could put that change in, and it would go into a change request, and it would have to be verified that the name is actually changing. And obviously, names can change, but what we want to avoid is we want to avoid having a name in the system that's not the legal name, and we also want to make sure that we're changing the data on the correct student. It's very easy sometimes to confuse two students if they have similar names, if they have similar birth dates. And what we want to make sure is not happening is that we're trying to combine two students into one ID. So the change request process hopefully alleviates some of those problems. Some of the change requests are going to go through on their own. For example, a race ethnicity change. The parent or guardian of the student is able to identify the student's race ethnicity however they would like to, and they can change that if they would like to. So if the student was classified with one code for race ethnicity in the 18-19 school year, and then the parent decides they want a different designation for the 19-20 school year, they're able to do that. Those changes are going to go through without a verification process. It's not really a necessary for someone to review it manually. When you're working a change request, you can click the View button to see the details of that change request. The View toggle then will explain what the details of that are. And if you do have a change request that requires a decision by your agency, it's going to have a red flag next to it over here in this Action Needed column. If it doesn't have the red flag, then it's not requiring your decision. One thing, as I just mentioned, that we try to avoid is duplicating a student in the database. If you come across a situation where you believe there are two WISE-IDs that are for the same student, you can report those as a duplicate. So if you see in the example here, we have two entries in the system for Brandon A. Jones, same birth date, same gender, and it's very, very likely that that is a duplicate. So if you report that as a duplicate, DPI will research the situation, and if it is indeed a duplicate, combine the two WISE-IDs into one to make sure that there's only one entry for that student in the database. And this is how you would do that. The WISE-IDs both would be entered into those two boxes. If you then you'd be required to put a comment in there as to why you think it's a duplicate. Could be detailed, could be simple, depending on the situation. Then DPI staff will review those submissions, do any research that we would need to do just to make sure that it really is a duplicate. And if we determine that it is, we'll combine the two IDs into one. The other side of that situation that happens a little less frequently, but can happen, is if two students' information have been combined into one WISE-ID. That's a little trickier. That would be still something that we would want you to report to us. That would probably come through in the form of a help ticket, but that would definitely be something we would want to take care of in the database as well. If there are any, by the way, if there are any messages that need your attention, there's a little envelope icon up here with a red circle and the number of messages in it that that you can click on, and that might help you with your workflow. So when we do the WISEID file upload, we want to make sure that we do this frequently, like I said before, to make sure that if there are any new students that have come into your school since the last time you ran the WISEID process, that we get those local person IDs attached to them and make sure that their data can be sent through WISEdata. And basically, the information that we collect, it might seem like a lot, but the whole point of the data is to make sure that we're not duplicating the student in the database. So the parent or guardian information, for example, is very, very helpful. If we have a situation where we're comparing two students and we want to see whether or not it's the same student or different, the parent or guardian information oftentimes is what helps us make that determination. So if we have two Jane Smiths and they have the same birth date, the same gender, but then we see that their parent-guardian information is different, then we can have an informed decision and realize that those are two students instead of the same Jane Smith, where they would need to be combined into one record. All of the information that's noted there in that third bullet needs to be included in the file from your student information system, or the upload won't work. And like I said, your information system, as long as they're certified for WISEdata, they should have that programming built in so that they do include all the information in the file that you need. If you should find that that is not the case, please let us know, and we do have representatives here who work directly with the vendors, and they would be able to sort out those types of technical issues. But that shouldn't be a problem. It should be factored into your information system already. To submit the file to WISEID, under the File Tasks menu, we want to choose the Upload link. And when we do that, we'll be taken to this screen. The request type is going to default to person, so that's where we want to leave it. What you will then be able to do is to choose the file. So if you go to the Choose File button there, you will be able to navigate to your PC to find where that CSV file is located. And again, the first step, what you've done is you've downloaded that file from your information system, saved it to your local PC. You're going to use this Choose File button to go out and find it. The file name will then appear in the box where it says No File Chosen there now. And once the file name is in that box, click that blue Upload button, and that will begin the process. If there would happen to be what the system would determine to be a critical error in the file, for example, if an entire column was missing, not necessarily no data in the column, but the column header wasn't there, it won't even accept the file, and it'll throw an error message on this screen telling you such and such a column is missing from your file. Again, that shouldn't happen. Your information system should have that all set to go and ready to go, but if that should be something that you encounter and you need help straightening that out with your vendor, please let us know and we can help you with that. But usually when you click that upload button, the process will run and everything will be great. And what you will then see after a little bit of processing time is a screen that looks like this. If there are any errors, they'll be noted in the error screen. And some of the common types of errors that we've seen are, for example, for gender, the system is looking for an M or an F for male or female, and sometimes we'll get a B or a G for boy or girl. Well, the system won't like that, and so it'll throw an error. Sometimes maybe the birth date won't be in the proper format. Instead of 4 digits for the year, maybe there will be only 2, something like that. So there are ways that there could be rows of the file that have errors. Excuse me. For example, if there's a parent or guardian that's missing, if a student is missing parent or guardian information, that could present an error. If there are students in the file that do not have errors, those students will be processed and taken care of. But the ones that do have errors, those rows you'll need to fix and re-upload before those students will be completed in the process. This committed column shows you how many students were successfully run from the file and entered into the database. So if you had 13 students in your file, but only 12 of them are committed, well then that's the reason for that is that there's one potential match. I'll talk about potential matches in a moment. It could also be that way if there would happen to be an error. You also will be shown the upload date information and the person who did the upload. So if you have more than one person at your school who's working on this, and you can look at the screen and see the last time that you sent up a WISEID file and who did that, so that might help you with your workflows at your school. For potential matches, what we mean by that is that the algorithm that the system uses to look at the file and determine whether or not the student is already in the database was not able to automatically make that determination. And it would like a human being to look at it and make sure that the person you're trying to upload into the system is not already in the database. So there are screens that you can look at where there'll be a split screen where it will show the data that you just uploaded and the data that's in the database and give you the opportunity to compare them to see if it's really the same student or if there are different students and you need to create a new WISEID. It's very important that this potential match process is looked at carefully because, like we said, we don't want to create a duplicate WISEID in the database. We understand that it's going to happen from time to time, but any care that you can take to do these potential matches carefully would alleviate that problem. And it can cause, as you can imagine, all kinds of data reporting issues down the line if there are two WISEIDs for the same student in the database. So what you can do on that potential match screen is you can determine that, yes, they are the same student, in which case you will check that box and the WISEID that's already in existence in the database will be used for your student. Or you can determine that, no, these are two different students. Look, the parent-guardian information is different for both. I know that they're two different people. You can check that box and choose to create a brand new WISEID for your student, and then that is the WISEID that will be used for your student. If you do make a mistake, you can do that report duplicate process, and we can take care of that for you here at DPI. Once you have then completed all your errors and all your potential matches, and these two columns are down to 0, you can go back to the menu and click this Student Download by Local Person ID link under the Reports and Validations menu. And that will then generate a CSV file for you that you can save to your local PC and upload back into your student information system. And that will complete the WISEID process. That is an important final step. That's one that sometimes people forget to do, especially the first time or two that they do it. We'll get a help ticket and they'll say, I did the WISEID process, but I don't see my students in it. It's because they accidentally forgot to upload that CSV file back into their sys. And so again, what that does is it matches up that WISEID with the local person ID and make sure that both your information system and WISEdata understands that we're talking about the same student. And that is basically the WISEID process. Are there any questions that anyone would like to throw out right now? Otherwise, we can obviously take questions at the end of the whole session. And I don't know how, I don't have a good method for knowing if there's anybody on the phone that has a question. So Michelle can probably help me with that.
I have a quick question. When our new students came to school, I searched to see if they had a WISEID already. And if they did have a WISEID, I went to the bottom of the page and added our local ID, added a date, and it pulled in our school. Does that automatically put, I didn't do this upload for all of our new students.
Okay.
I still have to do this upload for all of our students, correct?
So the question is, the person had gone in and done some of the WISEID work, like putting in the local person ID manually, and they want to know if they still need to do the file upload process. And the answer is, I would strongly suggest that you do the file upload process. It probably took the local person ID that you entered, but if you didn't do the step where you downloaded the CSV file and loaded it back into your information system, that could still be a problem. Technically you can do any changes that you'd like to do manually on the screens in the user interface of the application, but I would suggest instead that you do any changes you need to make with the file upload, simply because then the system is doing most of the work for you. All you have to do is run that file from your information system and upload it into WISEID. You don't have to do any extra typing. That would be my suggestion, but if you do have a situation where you need to change a student's race, ethnicity, or their name changes or something like that, technically speaking, yes, you can do those types of updates in the screen, in the UI of the screen, but I would suggest doing it in the file upload process. It's just a easier, less amount of work for you, and then you're letting the system do the work as far as like catching errors and things like that. But I would definitely say that you would need to run the process in the case of a local person ID to make sure that that CSV file that you generate from WISEID then gets uploaded back into your information system. That's a key part of it. So thank you. Good question. All right. I don't know if we have any, I can even tell if we have any questions online.
No, not at this time, Jeff.
Nothing?
No, not at this time.
Thank you. All right. The next thing that we will talk about then is the school directory application. This is your way, your method of updating information in the school database. So this would be things like school address, phone number, fax number, email address, website address, and then some of the key personnel, like maybe the school administrator, principal, things of that nature. You have a way to make those updates yourself, and also if you're having difficulty, obviously you can open a help ticket, and we at DPI can help you. But most of those changes you can make yourself. There is a window of time, usually around August and September, where we have to close down the school directory application for a time. That is because there is still a paper school directory that is printed every year. They need to take the application offline so that they can run the processes they need to run to make that printed school directory happen. And then once that is taken care of, they open it back up. And what we typically do is announce that with an email out to all school directory users, letting them know when it's gone down and letting them know when it comes back up. But if other changes need to be made at your school while that application would happen to be down, we're happy to help you out with that at DPI. But most of the time, this is available to you. What you can also update in this application is the first and last day of school, which is something that is tracked in the database, and also your low and high grade for the school. So if that would happen to change for some reason, so if you're kindergarten through 6 and you then in the next school year you're going to be 4K through 8, you can update that information in the school directory as well. Briefly, we're going to talk about Application Security Manager, or ASM. This is the software that is used to assign user roles to the various DPI applications. And typically there are 3 levels of security, and we call them level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is what we call the District Security Administrator, or the DSA. And this is usually 1 or perhaps 2 people at the school that would be in charge of all data privacy and security. They fill out a form basically stating that they understand data privacy issues and they understand the need to keep private data private, and that the information within the DPI applications will only be given to people who have an educational need to view or use that data. Once that form is filled out and sent to DPI, that person is designated as the DSA, and they then have the ability to assign the application roles to whomever at the school they think is necessary. Or they can delegate those tasks to other people if they would like to do it that way. The system is made very flexible on purpose so that whatever the workflow would happen to be at your school, you're able to utilize it in that way. So if you have a very hands-on, top-down approach and you have one person that is going to handle pretty much everything, you can set your system up that way. If you have it spread out over multiple people and you want different people to have different roles and different assignments, you can handle it that way. So hopefully that will work out no matter what your setup is or what your workflow is set up to be. All of the links that are put on this slide will help you if you are the person that's going to be using Application Security Manager to assign user roles. But basically what the DSA will do is the DSA will assign application administrators, and that is level 2 of that security model that I mentioned. The application administrator then can assign users to use the application. So using the example of the WISEID application that we just looked at, the DSA would assign either to herself or to a delegate the application administrator role for WISEID. That application administrator would then assign users to use the application. One of the most frequent questions we get about the process is the DSA assigns an application administrator role, mistakenly thinking they've assigned a user role. And so the person goes to try to log into, for example, WISEID, and they can't get in. And it's because what they have done is assigned to them the application administrator role instead of the user role. The user role is level 3 of that security model. So that would be the person that's going to be logging into the app, going in and doing the work. So that's our 3-tiered level of security. And again, the reason for that is to make it hopefully as flexible as possible so that whatever your workflow is or whatever your setup is at your school, you can use this tool to accommodate that. So the quick start guides, the user guides, the videos, everything that's noted on this page should help the DSA or the application administrator in the assignment of those roles using this application. If you get stuck or you have a question or you're not understanding how it works, you can always open a help ticket with us and we'll help you out with the process. So that's a very brief overview of ASM, but for the most part, that's something that you won't be using probably every day. It'll be something just as people come and go, perhaps personnel changes and things like that are probably when you would use that the most. And of course, when you're initially getting set up. All of the different DPI applications that you have access to are accessed through one menu, the Secure Home menu, so that you only need to remember one URL to access everything that you need to use to do your data reporting. This is an example of how that screen looks. This person has a lot of different applications. Your menu could be longer or shorter depending on what you have been given access to. But basically, it's a one-stop shop so that you can get into everything you need to get into with just using one URL. And the way you get there is what we call the Secure Home Information page, which is on the DPI website. It's this URL that's up here. That is a page that I strongly suggest that you keep bookmarked because it's probably something that you're going to be using frequently. The reason is that once you go to that page, you click on this link right here, and you log into Secure Home. So anytime you're going to be doing anything within a DPI application, you're going to need to come to this page, click on this link to log into Secure Home, and it'll take you to the sign-in screen. One thing I will mention, we talked about WAMS IDs before. If your school has a Google setup, you can log in with Google and bypass WAMS. You still need to have a WAMS ID initially and go through that process of getting set up, because the Application Security Manager tool that I mentioned that assigns the roles does do that based on the WAMS ID. But if you are a Google shop and you would like to sign in with Google instead of WAMS, you can do that. You do have that option. That is a relatively new addition to our security, but it is available to you. If you don't have Google, don't worry about it. You can still sign in with WAMS. I will also mention that on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, those are our scheduled days for updates to software. So if it's 7 o'clock on a Tuesday morning or a Thursday morning, and you go to log into something and you get a weird error message, or the screens don't look right, or something like that, just be aware that for until about 8:30 in the morning, we could be doing some software updates. So Tuesdays and Thursdays are the days that those are scheduled to happen. So what exactly is WISEdata anyway? Here's the technical definition here. The basic reason behind WISEdata is that all of the different SIS vendors that are out there in the world need to be able to submit data to the state. So we have a process that's using what is called the EDFI model, which is a data model that's used by many different states throughout the country. But basically what it allows to happen is that different SIS vendors, whether you have maybe Skyward or Infinite Campus or PowerSchool or JMC or any of the vendors that are certified for WISEdata, you can send that information to the state regardless of what SIS vendor you have. And that's basically the whole concept behind WISEdata, is to make it flexible so that schools have a choice of what SIS vendor they want to use. They're still able to send their data to the state in the same way, regardless of what vendor they have. There are also, besides public schools, there are charter schools, obviously, and there are also choice schools that send data. And so every single SIS vendor that is going to work with WISEdata has to be certified through the state, so there's a process they would go through. But once that has happened, everybody is kind of then on an even playing field as far as how that data is sent. When I'm going to take a step backwards and describe the process a little bit of how data submission works, just at a very high level. So you have all this data in your student information system. The state doesn't need all of it. We only need some of it. The data that the state needs, your information system is set up to send to WISEdata. And that would be done differently in different vendor products, but ultimately they all send us the same data. So whether it be enrollment information or attendance, discipline, roster, all the different types of data that we're going to need, your information system is going to be set up to send it to us, and only what we need, not anything that we don't need. And how that happens is a lot of vendors have it set up so that it's done automatically whenever you make a change on a screen in your vendor product. Some vendors have it set up so that it's done at a regular interval, so perhaps daily or weekly. And some vendors have it set up so that you have to actually manually trigger the data send anytime you want to send the data. So you'd want to check with your information system vendor customer service to make sure you know exactly how that data is sent to the state. But regardless of what the interval is set at, the data will be sent through to what we call a repository database, or the EdFi database. Once it is in the EdFi database, so there is the possibility for the data to be rejected outright if there is something critically wrong with it. And we call this a level 1 or an L1 error. If there would happen to be an L1 error with the data, it would not even make it to the database, and there would be 2 ways that you could find that out. One on the DPI side, which we'll talk about later, and one on your sys vendor side, probably in the form of an error log or an error screen or something like that. Usually an L1 error is something that you would need to have just fixed in your information system and send again. So for example, if you accidentally had only 9 digits of the 10-digit WISE ID in your information system attached to that student, the system would automatically know that that's not a valid WISE ID, and it would reject the data outright. There could be, dozens of other reasons why that might happen, but that's kind of an example of an L1 error. So once, though, the data does come to the EdFi database and it passes that L1 error check, it sits there until the data is validated. And what we mean by that is that the data is taken from that EdFi database and brought over into what we call the WISEdata portal. And when that is done, the data is run through a series of business rules to see that if the data meets the criteria that it needs to be in to be state reported. So there are a multitude of validations that the data is run through. This validation process runs every night automatically. It is also, you have the ability to trigger it manually yourself from the DPI software, and we'll be showing that in a little bit. So if you do a data upload at 9:55 a.m. and you want to see if there are any errors in that data right away, cue that validation and run it yourself, and then those validation messages will pop up. If you have a million other things to do and you say, I'm going to look at this again tomorrow, just leave it be, let it run overnight, and then you can look at it again tomorrow. Whatever works for you is fine. So once the data is in that WISEdata portal database, there are validation messages that will be undoubtedly displayed. There are always errors to fix and warnings to look at, and we'll talk about those in more detail coming up. But once the data, if there is data that does not have any errors attached to it, every night that is sent over to what we call the data warehouse. And that is the final database that data snapshots are taken from. What is a snapshot? Because the data is constantly coming from your information system into WISEdata, if not multiple times a day, certainly probably multiple times a week in most cases, it's constantly changing, or at least potentially constantly changing. So when we want to do, we want to capture that data for student reporting, for the report cards that come out, for any reporting that needs to go to the U.S. Department of Ed, or any other reporting needs, we need to make sure that we're taking a point-in-time capture of that data to make sure that we're getting it. And what we do is a snapshot, we call it. And we set a date in December. This year it's going to be December 10th. And we're going to take the data, the year-end data from 2018-19, so things like attendance and graduation and discipline and things like that. And we're going to then also take the third Friday of September and October 1 counts from 2019-20. And that again will be on December 10th, and we'll talk much more about snapshots later on. But the reason for the snapshot is so that we can get a point-in-time capture of that data to use for reporting purposes. And leading up to the snapshot, we have all kinds of data quality initiatives where we review data for all, not only the charter schools, but all the school districts and all the choice schools, and try to help you if we see some areas that we think are either wrong or perhaps at least need to be looked at to make sure that they're correct, we do reach out because when that December 10th date rolls around, we want to make sure that the data is in as good a state and as accurate as possible so that when it is captured for the reporting purposes, it is good data. So we do try to help you out as much as we can leading up to those snapshots. So again, that's kind of the three-stage process. The data comes into the repository database, it goes into WISEdata portal where it's validated against business rules, and then it goes into the data warehouse where it would ultimately be used for a snapshot and for reporting. WISEdata portal is the tool that we give you to be able to look at the data that you've sent to WISEdata and look at those validation messages that may be the result of the data validation, and those usually display in the form of errors and warnings. It also lets you look at those L1 or level 1 errors that I talked about if there would happen to be any of those. The portal can also be used to export data into a spreadsheet. So if you want to look at the data that has landed in WISEdata portal and you want to compare that back with a report from your information system, you're able to do that. And it also allows you to look at the contact information from other agents, and we'll explain a little bit later why you might want to do that. So the home page of WISEdata portal is going to show some basic information. The 3 school years that are open right now are these 3. Data for 2017-18 and 2018-19 can still be updated. Obviously, there has already been all the snapshots taken place for the data here, and one of the 2 snapshots has taken place for the data here, but we still have it open for you to be able to edit information. The main reason for that is because of dropout calculations. The way that the law is set up for dropouts is some of the calculations may go back as far as the 2017-18 school year right now, and so we need to have that open for you so that if there is a mistake in the data that is going to result in a student being listed as a dropout that should not be listed as a dropout, we want you to be able to correct that before that calculation is made so that the data is correct and we don't have someone out there listed as a dropout who's not really a dropout. So that's the main reason for that. Once we get past the December 10th snapshot, that 2017-18 school year will be closed out, and there'll be usually a notice, I believe, that goes out informing you when that's going to happen. And then that data will no longer be able to be updated in WISEdata. We'll just have these 2 school years open. When we get to the 2020-21 school year, we'll have that same period where we have 3 school years open for a while, and then after the snapshot, the 3rd one will drop off. We'll talk about this a little bit later on what you can do if you have gone past the snapshot and find out that you had data that was incorrect. There is a process for that, but we won't go over that just yet. This home screen in the WISEdata portal shows you the SIS vendor subscription that you have. So this particular agency has let us know that Infinite Campus is their SIS vendor. That's the tool that's going to be sending the data to us. If that would happen to have changed over time, there could be a different vendor for a different school year noted there. If there is a situation where you're going to be switching school vendors, please let us know that at DPI as soon as you know it so that we can give you all the information that you need to know about what you need to do for data reporting regarding that switch in vendors. As you can see, there is also a box underneath that tells us the last time that data was received. So for this particular agency, we've gotten 2018-19 school year data as recently as September 10th, but so far we have not received any data yet for the 19-20 school year. If you have a question as to whether or not your data is making it to WISEdata, this screen can be helpful in determining that for you. Also, you're going to see a validation message summary. Basically, there are errors and there are warnings. If you have warnings associated with your data, that is usually an indication that the system wants you to look at that data more closely. It's not necessarily wrong in the case of a warning, but it is unusual for some reason, and the system would like you to take a look at it and make sure that it is indeed correct. If it is correct, you can acknowledge the warning and then move on. If it is not correct, you can make the change in your information system, resubmit it, and then that should clear the warning and make it go away. Errors, on the other hand, are pieces of data or data fields, data records that the system has determined are in fact incorrect for some reason. And so you would, in the case of errors, definitely go into your information system, make the correction, and then resend the data to clear the error. And again, you can trigger those validations manually or let them happen automatically overnight. Also on that home screen, here's a little more detailed information. So you don't really need to get too involved with this screen unless you're actually troubleshooting an issue. I think sometimes people get a little too concerned about red X's and green check marks and don't really need to be worried about it if they're not actually troubleshooting an issue. So as you can see, for example, for the 18-19 school year, you can see when the most recent data was sent in each category. And that could be helpful if you're troubleshooting a particular issue. So for example, if you know that your enrollment records look fine, but it's discipline that doesn't seem to be sending correctly, you can look at that discipline column and see, oh, look at that. I've got enrollment data from the 10th, but my discipline data hasn't sent since the 5th. Maybe there's something I need to look at in my information system to see why that's happening that way. So this screen, or this section of the screen is designed to break down that data a little bit more if you're troubleshooting a particular issue. And again, up at the top, we can see that no data has been received for any category yet for the current school year. If you're not troubleshooting an issue, you probably won't look at the screen much. Maybe just to see back up here again, when did my data send? Oh, okay, I see it sent. I'm feeling pretty good about it. But if you are researching a particular problem, you may want to come in here and look at it in more detail. If there would be some of those L1 errors I mentioned, if you click on one of these icons, it will bring up a pop-up window that will allow you to look at the L1 errors. I will tell you that it's in what they call JSON format, or a sort of computer language format. It may be helpful to you, it may not be helpful to you, but it will be helpful to your system vendor if they're helping you troubleshoot an issue. So that is the reason it's in that format. They need to know that sort of computer language-y type format and able to troubleshoot some of the issues on their end. Here is that queue and import button that I mentioned. It's yellow. When you click it, it turns to kind of an off color so that it's grayed out so that you can't click it again until the validation runs. If you would like to receive an email notification when the validation has completed, go ahead and check that box, and then you will be sent an email when all the validations have run. Excuse me. If you want to check to see if data has been sent in the various different categories and when it was last modified, how many records were sent, things of that nature, you can see that information here too. So discipline as opposed to program information as opposed to roster. You can see the last time those were sent. The next section of screens in the WISEdata portal is under the Data Quality tab. And here you have the ability to, and this may or may not be helpful depending on your setup, but you have the ability to filter the data not only by school year, which is always helpful, but also by school. So if you're a charter school that's part of a district, this could be very helpful because you can select your school from the dropdown, and then you're only looking at the data that pertains to your school. You don't have to worry about all the other schools in the district. If you're a standalone, then this is less helpful. You probably won't have to use that filter. There are data quality indicators on the page that are designed to give you a high-level view of the data so you can eyeball it and see if any errors just jump out at you immediately. So let's say in your enrollment count, let's say you know that you have 35 PK students and this is only showing 3. Well, that will be a quick indicator that there's something wrong with the data that's trying to come through for those students. So that's what this is intended to be. Nothing too detailed, but it is a high-level look at the data just to make sure. So, for example, if the fourth grade count was 0 and you knew that you had 47 fourth graders, you know, obviously you need to take a look at that data. And then there are graphs also for attendance information and discipline information. So if you, again, see something that immediately jumps out at you as, why don't I have any attendance for my 7th graders? That would be something that might just very high level, just by eyeballing the information, tell you that something is wrong. Validation messages, as I mentioned, those errors and warnings, are very important, and that's probably your main reason for coming to WISEdata Portal is to look at those errors and warnings. This summary will give you an at-a-glance indication of the status of the data. So in this case, we look like we have 684 errors and 461 unacknowledged warnings. So that lets me know that I have a lot of stuff I need to look at. It also tells you when your last validation was run. So if that's August 17th and today we're at September 24th, maybe the very first thing I want to do is run a validation to see if these totals go down after I do that. That would be probably the first thing I would do in that case. Error messages are displayed on the screen like this, and each validation message, whether it's an error or warning, has a 4-digit code associated with it and an icon that describes it. So in the case of errors, we have an exclamation point and we have a red X. The exclamation point is going to indicate to us that that is a critical error. And what we mean by that is that the error is such that that data cannot be ported over to that data quality database at all. So whatever is wrong with that data, for example, the grade level provided is outside the low-high grade range for your school. So let's say your school only goes up to grade 6 and you have sent through an enrollment for an 8th grader. The system can't handle that. So if you're not supposed to have 8th graders, I don't know what to do with this. It's just dead in the water, that data is. One of these other errors that's not as critical, it's saying the exit withdrawal date is missing for the student's enrollment. Well, we know the student was enrolled. We know what their start date was. That data can still go to the data warehouse. It's still something that you need to correct before we would take a snapshot, but it's not critical enough to prevent the data from going over to the other database. So that's kind of the designation between the critical error with the exclamation point and the error with just the red X. If you would like to prioritize your workload and take care of those exclamation point errors first, that's probably a great idea if you want to handle it that way. There is a way for you to, if you have multiple people that are working in the WISEdata portal at the same time, there is a way for you to designate that you're working on an issue so that somebody else doesn't grab that same error and you're duplicating your work. This star icon here, when you click on it, that turns yellow, and it's kind of like the favorites in like a web browser in a way. And what that will indicate is that someone is already working on that error, and that if I go in then and I see that that red star, I'll know that, oh, I'll just take a different error because somebody else is already working on that one. Also, you have a short and a long description of the error. So the short description is going to display, but if that doesn't give you enough information that you need to know, you can click on it and get a more detailed description. If that still doesn't help you, excuse me, by clicking on that error code, you'll be taken to what we call a knowledge-based article, or a KBA. And that will give you not only a description of the error or warning, it will also give you an example and a possible way that you can fix the error. So if you're stuck and you don't know what to do, click on that link, go to the KBA, read more about it. Hopefully the KBA tells you what you need to know to fix the error. If at that point you're still stuck, then you can open a help ticket, and obviously our customer service people are more than happy to look at it for you. But hopefully that's a nice feature. One then other thing I'd like to note here is when you've expanded this out and you can see, now we've blocked it out because we don't want to show personal information, but the student's last name, first name, and WISEID are going to be noted here. So we have, in this case, the error is an invalid expected transfer agency. So the agency has indicated that the student is transferring elsewhere, but the agency code that they've put in is not valid. So we don't, the system doesn't know how to take that information. So you'd know the student's name and you'd know their WISEID, what school they were in, their enroll date, and then there's the details link. When you click on the details link, you're going to be taken to a screen. It's a pop-up. It'll pop up in a new tab. And it will give you all kinds of detailed information about that student's record. And anything that you need to know to fix that error would be noted on the screen. So in this case, the student information came up, and we're looking here at the very top, but we're, let's see, I want to go down one more, don't I? The detail. Kind of got ahead of myself a little bit, so I'll backtrack in a moment. But here's the detail screen. So at the top, you're going to see the student information, and you're going to see their WISEID, their name, their birth date, their gender, all the sort of demographic type information. And you're going to be able to compare what you have in what you've sent through from your SIS with what's in the WISEID system. And if that would happen to be different, that could actually be throwing an error or a warning. So that's why that comparison is there. So for example, if the birth date in your SIS that you sent was 1999, but what is in the WISEID system is 1998, that would throw an error, and you'd be able to see those two values there on that screen. Other student information is indicated in here, all kinds of different information as far as their demographic type information. So whether or not they are economically disadvantaged, their food service eligibility, English language learner status, and all that kind of stuff is noted there as well. If you have recently sent data and you have not run a validation yet, you can check this, you can click on this, I hate that it keeps doing that, I'm sorry about that. This box down here that's in red is called the API view. And what that does is it goes out to that repository database that I talked about and pulls the data in so that you can look at it in case it would happen to be different. So let's say that the information you were trying to correct was their English language learner status. And the error that you got indicated that the status was sent as, let's say, a code 4, and you knew that that student should be a code 7. So you made the correction in your information system, and you sent the data back through, but the error is still on the screen because it hasn't validated yet. Well, when you click on that API view icon and bring up this view, you can see that, oh, look, the data is now a 7. My data send worked. Let me go ahead and validate that data, and then let's see if the error goes away. So this is a way that you can peek into that repository database and see what is pending to be validated in case that information is different from what's on the student information screen. And every single section on that screen is going to have its own API view where you can make that check if you would need to do that. And it's probably only going to be used when you're troubleshooting an issue or when you're, really trying to figure out why something isn't displaying the way you think it should. Question?
So when you're saying going into fix, am I going straight into WISE to fix it, or should I go into fix and then uploading?
So the question is, when you're fixing data, should you be fixing it in WISE or should you be going into your SIS and fixing the data? Good question. The answer is it will always be fixed in your SIS.
Okay. So then in order for it to be clarified in WISE, I would have to do another re-upload?
And then in order for it to be clarified in WISE, would I have to do another re-upload? Correct. So you make the correction in your information system, send the data again, and then run a validation. Or if you want to look at the API view and see if it's changed, you can do it that way too. But once you've done that, once you've done the correction and you've sent the data again, once that validates, that should take that into account and hopefully clear the error or change the warning. But yes, that's a great question. You're always going to want to make the changes in your information system and then resend the data. So let me go back to the stuff that I skipped over. Sorry about that. I got ahead of myself a little bit there. Warning messages look like this, very similar to errors. They still have that 4-digit code. That's also a link that you can click on to go to a KBA that talks about that warning. But the icon is the yellow triangle that indicates a warning rather than an error. And again, a warning means that the data could be correct, but it's for some reason questionable. The system thinks that it's questionable. So it wants you to take a look at it and make sure that what you sent is correct. So in this case, the special education record was truncated because there was an overlap of records or something was wrong with the end date. It might not be wrong, but it probably is wrong. Could you please take a look at that record and make sure? If you take a look at it and you say, nope, I sent it correctly, it's just kind of a weird situation, but we're aware of it, just go ahead and acknowledge the warning, and then you can move on. If you look at it and you say, oh, yeah, nope, that's a mistake, didn't mean to do that, go ahead and change it in your information system, resend the data, and then the warning should clear after it validates. Warning messages work the same way as errors in that you can use the little star there to indicate that you're working on it if you'd like to do that. Also, if you'd like to acknowledge more than one warning at the same time, that can be a huge time saver. So instead of, let's say that there were, let's look at that example above where there's 61 students in the warning. Let's say that you determined that that is correct data that you've sent and you just want to acknowledge and you're not going to be changing any information. Well, do you really want to go into 61 different students, acknowledge them all one at a time? Of course you don't want to do that. You've got other things to do. So if you click that top box in that in the red example there, you can select all of the rows in that error and acknowledge them all at the same time. If you would need to use the WISEdata portal to search for a student, you can do that as well. There's a student search link in the menu at the top. And when you click on that, you're brought to this screen where you can choose the school year. You don't have to choose the school or the school type if you don't want to, but you can if that will help your search. You can put in the last name, the first name, the WISE ID, any combination thereof, and you should be able to bring up the students. If you just click search, you can get a list of all things that you can sort. All the columns are sortable, so if you want to sort by WISE ID or last name, you can do that. If you want to sort by errors, if you want to bring up students that have the most errors associated with them and kind of tackle that first, if that's the way you want to work your workflow, you could do it that way too. And then when you have a student here, obviously we've got it blocked out, but their WISE ID and name would be indicated there as well, which is kind of helpful if you're searching for a student. You can go right to their detail screen from there if you'd like to do that. Kind of covered that already. Enrollment records. Did I go through that yet? So your most basic piece of information after the demographics is the enrollment. So the date that they began school and the date that they ended school. So most of our students probably start on the first day of school and end on the last day of school, but obviously that is not the case for every student. So we want to make sure that the enrollment information is entered correctly. And when we say correctly, what we mean for state reporting purposes is that the beginning date is the first date that the student was in a seat in class, and the end date is the last date that they were in a seat in a class. So there may be other reasons for you to track the student outside of those dates within your information system, and that's fine. But as far as what's reported to the state, we want to make sure that those are the guidelines that you use for submitting an enrollment. So if you do have a student that comes into your school in the middle of the school year, you want to make sure that you send in their enroll date as the first date that they were actually in a seat in a class, not the date where they, signed papers or registered or anything like that. That may be where you begin to track them, but that's not where we want them state reported. And the same with the end date. The last date, if they happen to leave your school before the school year is over, you'd want to make sure that you send their end date as the last date that they were in class. We can have, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, enrollment overlaps when that information is not sent exactly correctly, and that can be a problem for two different schools at once. So we'll talk about that in a little while. The enrollment also has that API view, so if you have sent data recently but it isn't validated and you want to check on that, you can go ahead and do that with that API view. And again, let's say the error through because you maybe your school is only grade 9 through 12 and you had accidentally sent the enrollment through as a grade 8 and it threw an error. Well, when you bring up this API view, you look at the grade level and you see, okay, good. Now I see that they're 12. I fixed my error. Let me go ahead and validate it. That's just, again, a way for you to peek into that repository database and see that data that's come through and hasn't yet been validated. Before we go to the next section, I think we should probably take a break. So let's do that. Let's say at about 20 till, let's come back. And that'll give you an opportunity to get a snack if you need it, use the restroom, whatever you need to do, check your email, and we'll come back at 20 till. Again, for the folks in the room, the restrooms are down. If you go out the store, you'll want to go to your right to that hallway and then almost all the way down on your left is where that will be located. So vending machines, probably your best bet is down on the plaza level where you first came into the building. All right, thank you. The clock on the wall says 10:40, so let's jump back into it. The next thing we're going to talk about in the WISEdata portal is the School Roster Details tab. Roster is, when you look at it at a first glance, maybe something that seems like it would be very simple. So it's all the courses that you offer, who's teaching those courses, and what students are enrolled in them. That's basically it. There's some other information too, but that's basics of it. But if you look at it a little further, that's a lot of records. By far, the most records in any data reporting category are in roster. So that means that with all those data elements and all those records coming in, the possibility for something to be wrong is a little greater. So a lot of times roster requires a little bit more attention, especially maybe the first couple times that you've looked at it. On this tab in the WISEdata portal, the School Roster Details, it's a good way to get a high-level look and see how your roster data is coming in. If the screen is blank, then obviously you know right away you've got a problem because we haven't gotten anything yet. But if you can use it to just kind of see what your data looks like at a very high level. If you are a charter school that's a part of a district, that school filter is definitely one that you're going to want to use because I think actually the system makes you choose a school anyway. I don't think it lets you leave it blank, but you're not going to want to look at all the course data for all the other schools in the district. You're only going to be interested in your stuff. So that would be definitely a good one to make sure is put on there. And then the term type as well. So are you looking at first quarter, first semester, you know, et cetera? Obviously, you're going to want to make sure that that's selected. There are also export files in the WISEdata portal that give you a lot more detail on not only roster, but all of the different data categories. And we'll talk about those later, but this is a good high-level indicator of what your roster data looks like. When you drill in a little bit more, once you've got those filters set, the screen should look like this. So you've got all the different columns there. There's a section code, what your local course title for the course is, whether or not it would be a CTE course, all kinds of stuff that could, at a glance, can help you see whether or not that data's been sent in correctly. And then you can even break it out so that you've got section details, all kinds of information you can get from the screen. If there would happen to be an error associated with a record or a warning, it would be noted here, and you could see what that validation is. So in this case, warning 6766 through saying that the section is associated to 0 students. So there's a section out there apparently with no students in it. So that might be something that would require your attention to look at. Part of roster is the career education data reporting, and this is something that's relatively new to the WISEdata world, and something that we are trying to offer as much training and guidance on as we can. Because it's new to the WISEdata world, prior to this past school year, I believe most of this information was sent in on Excel spreadsheets. So that's quite a step up from the way it was done in the past. And what this diagram is intended to show is the difference between and the similarities between CTE and CCR. CTE, or Career in Tech Ed, is required for Carl Perkins districts for students grades 11 and 12. And CCR, or College Career Ready, is required for all public schools for grades 9 through 12. There are data elements in the blue that are unique only to CTE that you don't need to worry about only in the case of CTE. There are then the data elements that are in the yellow that apply only to CCR. And then there's that intersection in the middle where the data elements kind of intersect regardless of which you're submitting. So that's hopefully hopefully a helpful diagram to show how those are split out. There is there is training that is specific to CTE and CCR that goes into a lot more detail than what I'm going to go into today, but hopefully I can hit the high points to get you started, and then hopefully you can take advantage of those other trainings and other information as that presents itself. So CTE courses are offered through the recognized Wisconsin program areas. You can link to those program areas there from that link in the slide. They have to be taught by a licensed CTE teacher within the specified discipline. And the exception to that is health science education. They allow an exception for that, but all of the other program areas have to be taught by a licensed CTE teacher. If you have a licensing question, there is a tool there. ELO, or ELO, is the system, the licensing system that the state uses. You can click on that link and you can go out and look up licensing information using that tool. CTE course offerings are submitted using SCED 6. Every so often, I don't know if it's every year, but every so often the NCES, I believe is the acronym, if I'm correct, releases a new list of course codes, course code information, and the latest is SCED 6. We try to get the latest version up into WISEdata, and so a lot of times there may be a lot of changes. This last time, fortunately, there were very, very few changes between 5 and 6. So you want to determine, though, how your SIS is sending that information in, if they're using the SCED 6 code or the roster code. We'll look at those in a minute, and just exactly how that data is coming in. The information system is going to be mapping that behind the scenes and sending the data in the format that WISEdata needs it, but it might appear different on your screen depending on how your vendor has that set up for you. So you're going to want to make sure you know how that looks in your vendor tool. Courses that are CTE will have a CTE flag set to yes, and if you're sending in CTE information and the course flag is set to no, that will be an error situation. You can download the courses using that link that's noted in the slide there, and if you use the filter for CTE set to yes, you'll get only CTE courses, or if you'd like to see all courses, you can do that as well from that link. That may not apply to all of you, but if it does, that's handy information to have. So this is an example of that CTE flag, where you can see in the yellow in the top example, for the course that's on row 4 with the roster code of 10002, the CTE flag is set to yes, and you can then see in column I what the SCED 6 code is, and that's what I meant between the difference between a roster code and a SCED code. So you'd want to see how that displays in your information system. Behind the scenes, it's going to be mapped to the correct format to whatever WISEdata needs, but it might be different on your user interface screen depending on how that's set up. So if you had a course then that was not, you were not trying to send it in as CTE, you just wanted it to be a regular course, but you accidentally sent through the course code that's mapped with that CTE yes, you would see an error in WISEdata portal to that, and vice versa. If you were trying to send it in as a CTE course and it had the flag set to no, that would be an error too. So you'd need to go in and finagle those codes so that they're set up the right way when the data sent. College and Career Ready, or CCR, not the band CCR, which is what I always automatically go to in my brain when I see CCR. It is a requirement of Act 59 that college and career readiness data is sent, and we need that program name submitted. And if you need to know what program name to submit, I'll show you on the next slide how you can determine that. But there's a dual enrollment chart, and the chart I'm about to show you can be linked to on that link there in the slide. And a quick note that this is only for grades 9 through 12. You do not need to submit this for any other grades. There's one more before I get to that example, sorry. Sometimes there's some misconceptions about dual enrollment for data reporting purposes. So when we're talking about dual enrollment, we're talking about high school students that are attending a program either at a post-secondary institution or sponsored by one, and they're getting either high school credit or college credit as a result of that. So that's something that needs to be reported, and there's a special name, that's a program name that's reported for each type of situation, and that's what we're going to go over next. The districts should, whether it's, well, it's easier to just show you. Out-of-state dual enrollment is treated the same way as an in-state, and then virtual or online courses are treated the same way as well. And there's some resources there before we get to the example. Sorry, I'm jumping way ahead of myself, aren't I? But all of these links here on this slide are great information for whomever at your school is going to be doing this reporting. That's probably stuff that they're going to want to look over. And these helpful resources as well. But what I want to get to, oh, I know where it is. I'm sorry. My apologies. So what I want to do is come out here to this handy page. And I'm looking for my dual. I am so sorry. I don't know where that went. But there's a chart. This is what I want. Sorry, folks. This is what I wanted to show you. So when I was talking about what type of program name you need to submit for WISEdata, I'm talking about the program name used in roster column on this sheet. And so it describes all the different scenarios for dual enrollment in the definition box, and then what your program name will be submitted as when you send it through to roster. So this is the super handy chart that you're going to want. And obviously this is the 1819 one, but there will be a 1921 if it's even changed at all. So for example, if you've got a program set up where somebody would be going to a UW system, and they'd be a high school student who would be taking classes, either set up through or at a UW system facility, this would be the category then that you would send that through when you send it through in roster.
And you're going to share these slides after this, or could you share these now with us so we can click on that and save that for them? You know what I mean?
Were you given the agenda?
They're in the chat.
Perfect. Oh, but they're not in Teams, are they? So the slide deck is noted here. Is there a way to get everybody the agenda?
Yeah. I'll send you the
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Thanks, everybody.
Hello, Jeff.
Yeah.
This is Michelle. The agenda is on the very last slide of the presentation.
Thank you. So here's, again, your CTE and CCR resources, but here's a wide range of helpful resources for you that covers a lot of the things that we've already talked about this morning. There's general WISEdata help. The Secure Home Information page that I mentioned before is linked here. If you would need to open a help ticket, you can get that from this link. We haven't talked about this yet, but we have a Google Plus community for WISEdata that we encourage you to join. You can do so by clicking on that link. and we post information out there for you periodically, including a Friday top 5, we call it, where we have sort of the top 5 things you need to know for that week, if they're the trending help tickets that we're seeing perhaps, or maybe something to do with a snapshot that's coming up, or information that's new to a school year that we want you to know, or whatever the case might be. And then the other part of that community that's great is it's a chance for users to help users. So if you are let's say, for example, a PowerSchool user, and you just don't know how to do something in PowerSchool, you can put a note out there in the Google Plus community and say, hey, attention PowerSchool users, I just can't figure out how in the world I need to put in my special ed program end date. How do I do that? And then another PowerSchool user can jump in and say, oh, you go to this screen and do that. So it's a really helpful tool for users to help users when there are questions that maybe DPI can't help you with. Like, for example, for vendor-specific things, we don't always know what those vendor screens look like, but another user of your same vendor product would know that. What's probably not a good idea to post in there are things that you want DPI to answer, because the possibility of those falling through the cracks is the reason why I say that. So that would be something you definitely want to send in a help ticket. But if it's something that you would like another user to help you out with, that's a great forum for that. And then also to get the information that we post out to you. Questions?
I signed up for some WISE classroom e-learning, and they gave me the agenda for the classes, and I'm having problems with signing into the classes, and I emailed back DPI. DPI told me that it was a problem with my school system, which it can't be because it's the DPI page. You know, you sign in, you get the classes, you click on the course, gives you the DPI sign-in page again, and it won't accept my password. Same password as before. So I was given the lady's number to call, and I haven't heard back from anybody. Is there another contact or a way, a help ticket or something that I can put in for the e-learning?
Yeah, let's see if we can, at the next break, let me take down your information and I'll see if I can get somebody working on it. So the question for the people on the phone was, somebody was having trouble logging into the e-learnings, which we'll talk about, and it hasn't been working for them. So I'm going to take down their information and see if we can get that working for them. So the WISE Classroom e-learnings are a good way for you to get up to speed on how to use WISEID and WISEdata. And data submission, it's a really nice, where you can it's a really in-depth class, and then you can take a quiz and get certified, so that you know what you need to know to do the data submission. And unfortunately, that wasn't working for this user, but we'll get that straightened out for you. Sorry about that. Webinars, we have a WISEdata user group webinar that you are all invited to participate in. Every Tuesday afternoon at 1:30, so there will be one today. What we do in this call is we give you all kinds of updates. Like I alluded to earlier, we do have pretty frequent software updates. So a lot of times things need to be updated just because of changes that come from school year to school year, if there's changes in the data that needs to be collected or things like that. But also we take feedback from our users, and we put enhancements and changes into the system based on that feedback to try to make it easier for you to use and more user-friendly. And so at the lower right-hand corner of every application that you're working in, pretty much, every app, there is a feedback button, and when you click that, you're taken out to what we call user voice, or our feedback site. It's also feedback.dpi.wi.gov. If you have a suggestion for an improvement, put it in there, or peruse the suggestions that other people have submitted and vote on them. And the suggestions that have the most votes usually are the ones that float up to the top and are the ones that the developers work on or determine are the highest priority to work on. So that feedback is very important to us, and a lot of the features that you've seen in WISEdata Portal that I've shown, like for example, that yellow star you can click on to indicate that someone else is working on the validation, or the fact that you can click on the validation code and get the KBA article to pop up, things like that. All of that stuff has come from user suggestions. So if you have a suggestion to make one of the applications better, please submit that, because we really do take that feedback seriously, and changes definitely have been made to the system based on people's feedback. That webinar then that we have at 1:30, we'll start with a WISEdata update, any changes that might be upcoming soon to the WISEdata portal. And then we will also talk about WISEID, if there are any changes coming up to the WISEID system. We talk about Career Tech Ed and CCR individually, since that is an area that usually generates some questions. And we also talk about WISE-, which we have not covered yet, but we will in this session in a little bit. Any updates or information that you would need to know pertaining to any of those will be discussed. And then the last half of the call, or the last portion of the call, is a question and answer session where people submit their questions, and then a DPI person has the opportunity to review it and answer. And that can be on any of those topics. So a lot of times, even if you don't have a question yourself, it might be a good experience to listen to what other people's questions are and see what the answers are. It might be something that you didn't even realize you had a question about, or something that you, you know, oh yeah, I forgot, I did want to do that. So it's a great opportunity. We do record them. I understand we have a better method perhaps now of recording them than we had in the past. So hopefully those, if that time doesn't work out for you, Tuesday afternoon at 1:30, hopefully there will soon be a way for you to log in and view those after the fact. We have an events calendar that's linked there. So what we try to do is get any WISEdata related events put into that calendar. If it's a conference that your SIS vendor might be having, a conference that DPI might be having that you would need to know about. Obviously, snapshot deadlines will be in there. Those weekly user group webinar dates will be in there. Anything that we think you could potentially take advantage of and help you out in your WISEdata reporting, we'll put in that events calendar. So that's a good thing to check out. The WISEID Quick Start Guide is linked there, so that's a quick down and dirty way to get up and running in WISEID if you need that. There is a little ASM tutorial there on how you can assign a user role if you would need, or someone at your school would need that. The Info for School pages is a great way if you're brand new, either you're a brand new school or brand new to WISEdata. There's a lot of just very high level basic information on how to get started with WISEdata that's noted there. And if you should ever be changing student information system vendors, that would be a place to start to get all the information that you would need to know about what that entails. And we would also ask that if that were ever the case for you to switch vendors, that you would let us know at DPI as soon as you can, so that we can get you all the information that you need, because that can be a complicated process. And then the knowledge base articles that we talked about, if you would like to just look at them or search for them outside of the WISEdata portal, you can do that by using that link there. So hopefully those resources are helpful to you. And once we have disseminated the link to the slide deck out to everyone, if you want to just use, you know, hop onto this page and use, you know, save this slide maybe as a page or something that you can access all these links from at once. The next thing we want to talk about is WISE staff. So we've at this point only been talking about the student data that's collected for students. And there is also a data collection that happens every year that pertains to staff. And we want to find not only demographic information, but assignment data related to the staff. And so what we do is we consider it a point-in-time collection, and we like to think of the third Friday of September as our kind of point-in-time date. And we like to collect the data as you know it at the third Friday of September. We do this for federal reporting purposes as well as state reporting purposes. And there are the links there to the U.S. Department of Ed if you want more information about what they require as far as reporting goes. So basically what we're looking for is all the different assignments that are required to be reported, that you send those in through the WISE staff application. And this is what it looks like. It's very closely tied to WISEID. The reason for that is that each staff member has a WISEID in the same way that each student has a WISEID. And again, that's the unique identifier that identifies them in the database. And again, we want to make sure that we're not duplicating a staff member in the database the same way we try not to duplicate students. There is a possibility, and we have had this happen, that a student who has a WISEID graduates from high school and eventually becomes a staff member. And if that is the case, they will keep that same WISEID all through their the cycle. So if they would happen to have had a WSN or a WISEID when they were a student, and then they end up as a staff member at some point down along the line, they'll retain that same WISEID. The screen, this is the landing screen, the first screen that you'll see when you log into the WISE staff application. And as was the case with WISEID, we've been told that there are some user interface updates that are coming to WISE staff very shortly. So some of these screens may look a little different in the future, and if that's the case, I apologize for that, but that's one of those updated improvement processes that I mentioned, where through users' feedback, we've kind of made some improvements to the system. So some of those are coming along very shortly. I believe there is actually a WISE staff user group that meets periodically and advises the development team on some of the things they could do to improve the product. So the first step in the WISE staff process is very similar to the first step in the WISEdata process, and that is doing the WISEIDs. So it's done in the very same way. It's a file that's generated in your system. The thing about staff that can be a little different is that not every school has their staff in their SIS. They may have a separate HR system that they use. So that's kind of the curveball that gets thrown into WISE staff. But regardless, your tool should generate that WISEID file the same way as we talked about before, only it would be for staff members rather than for students. This is important not only for the WISE staff data collection, but I'm going to take a step back and talk again for just a moment about roster. Because in the roster data collection, that's where we have the course information, and we have an element of that is what teacher is teaching what course. That teacher in roster needs to have a local person ID attached to their WISEID in order for the system to read all the information properly. And the way that you do that is by running the WISEID process on the staff side. And so if there is a different person at your school that is doing staff data, you know, if student and staff are split up, you know, among different teams or whatever, different people, then you want to make sure you're on the same page with running those WISEIDs so that the staff IDs are run frequently enough that it won't cause you errors on your roster submission. But the WISEID process on staff, like I said, is run in the same way using the same tool, basically. It's just that it's set to run for staff instead of student. One of the columns in that file upload that you put into the WISEID, it designates whether the the individual is a student or a staff member. If you need help, again, with those, there are some links there. Those were linked before, I believe. But the process is exactly the same, only it's done on the staff side. The WISE staff application is going to have you verify contact information. The reason for this is that if notices need to be sent out about the WISE staff application, we need to know who to send those to. The primary and secondary person responsible for verifying staff data are noted in the system, and then depending on what the communication is, it would be sent out to either both or one or the other of those people. So if you do not have your staff contacts updated in the system, you'll be noted with that big orange message there, and you'll be asked to do that. You can edit an existing contact over there, or you can delete a contact using the red X if they're no longer at the school and they're in the system currently, or you can use this button to add a brand new person. You can access this, by the way, from this admin menu down here on the left. It's one of the very last items on the left-hand navigation. I believe that all of this will be in a format up on the top, similar to the way the WISEdata portal is when those changes come through. But for now, this is the way it looks in the system. So this is how you would edit a contact. Just the information that we need basically is the email address and the phone number. If we would need to contact the primary, secondary person for whatever reason, we would use this information to do that. One reason we would want to contact is when we do data quality outreach. I mentioned earlier that we do a data quality outreach for student data prior to the snapshot. We do something similar on the staff side, and so that would be one reason why definitely we would want a contact person. There is a search feature where you can search for staff records, and that's in the search edit under the person up there. Very similar to the way that you searched for a student in WISEID. The difference being that you have some information about their entity ID that you can search by. Entity ID has to do with their licensing, so every staff member who is required to have a license will have an entity ID in the system, and that corresponds over to the ELO system that I mentioned before, which is the licensing system that DPI uses. Otherwise, most of the information is the same. What you may not have in a staff record is the parent-guardian information. If it has carried over from when they were a student in that example I gave, that would probably still be in there, but otherwise it's probably not going to be in there. But the screens look the same, and so there may be a space for it on there, even if you don't have anything to fill in there. One thing that is in the staff record that wouldn't be in the student record would be, again, that educator license information that I mentioned, specifically that entity ID. If their license would happen to have been expired, you in that bottom section there where it says active license is 1, expired license is 0, that could possibly be reversed if their license has been expired. Just a quick way you can check that. So what we have, the first type of information we have for staff is a contract. All of the information I'm about to go through on these next couple slides can be done in a file upload instead of being entered manually on the screen. It's probably better to do it in a file upload just because I think it's probably less work. You could have the information generated automatically from your system, whether it be your information system, your HR system, whatever it would be, and then just have it uploaded. If you do want to manually enter the information on the screens, you can do that though. And the reason that I'm showing these first is because it gives you a good kind of visual of what all the different data fields are and what kind of goes into into the contracts and that type of data. So what we're looking for in this instance is the contract days, salary, fringe benefits, information like that, the highest degree the person obtained, years of local experience versus years of total experience in education, and the local person ID that I mentioned before. That information is all important to obtain for the contract. And again, that's all also available, possible to be uploaded in a file upload. And then once we have a contract, we're going to have an assignment. So we're going to want to make sure we know not only their information about, sort of demographic type information and what their benefits are and things, but then we want to know what they're actually teaching or what their actual assignment is. And so in this case, we've got a teacher who teaches elementary all subjects. What we're going to want to fill in here is their local assignment title, and then you can see then over in the right in that blue box all the different information that might be pertinent. So for example, what grades they would teach, what their bilingual information might be, things of that nature. So all of that may or may not apply to every assignment, but it's there for you to fill in potentially. And again, all that's available on a file upload. Manage staff data is kind of the place where you'd start. So the reason I say that is that a lot of agencies choose to do this copy forward feature where you can take the staff data that had been submitted the previous school year, copy it forward. It automatically changes the year for you. So like the total years of experience and things like that, it automatically notches those up a year for each one. And then if you have people that have left, you can go ahead and edit them out. And if you have people that have come on board since that last report was done, you can go ahead and add them in. But it saves a lot of work potentially because you can keep the core data, assuming that your staff has not changed that much from school year to school year, you can keep the core data there, copy that forward, and then just kind of work on the changes and not have to worry about submitting everything again. If you have a situation where a file is automatically generated for you and you don't really, that might be less helpful to you because you have your whole staff generated in the file. You can just upload that, and that might be okay too. But if you want to take advantage of that copy forward feature, a lot of agencies do. That seems to be pretty popular. This is where you would upload then the files for contracts and assignments that I alluded to before. And that over on the left, there's an upload link under the Work with Staff Data section of the menu. And you can change that toggle then from contract to assignment, depending on which type of file you're uploading. And you'd use that Choose File button then towards the bottom to go out, find the file on your local PC, and bring that into where it says No File Chosen, that would be replaced by the file name once you've gone out and found it. So what you can do then is very important in how you do the upload. If you want to only update existing data for matching records, check that option. Or if you want to delete all data and replace with a new upload, check that option. Depending on what you're trying to do, it's very important that you select the correct option there, because if you delete everything, it's not going to come back. So you want to make sure that before you hit that blue upload button at the bottom that you have the right task selected in that.
Yes, there's a question on mine, Sarah packet. Is it required that schools upload staff contracts into WISE?
It is required. The question is it required that they upload staff contracts? There are rules around which staff members have different data submitted. So for example, for FTEs and for salary and for fringe benefits and all that. So there is documentation on the website as far as what data needs to be submitted for what type of staff member. And then also there is coming up special WISE staff training, like very in-depth, much more in-depth than we can get into here today, that are offered by the 12 CISAs. So that would be one of the things that would be indicated on that calendar that I mentioned on the previous slide. So it might be advantageous to check out and see when a CISA training for WISE staff is coming up in your area, and perhaps take advantage of that if that's possible, if the dates work out for you and so on. Otherwise, we do have user group calls that are dedicated to WISE staff as well. They're going to start up again in October, I believe, and it will be a similar format to the way I described the user group call for the student side of things. Obviously, it will be geared strictly, though, to staff, and all kinds of questions about contracts and assignments and things that you might have could be addressed in those forums as well. Don't have the times or the days on those yet, but those will be announced very soon, I believe, as those are, I think, starting in October. Maybe they're already on the calendar, I'm not sure. So that would be another way that you can get that information. But I think as far as what needs to be uploaded as far as contracts and assignments, that can be different depending on the type of staff member it is. So you'd want to make sure that you look at the documentation and know what type of data you need to send for what type of staff member. Hope that answers the question. But the staff data collection is required as a very high-level answer to that. Once you've uploaded the file, you're going to get a results screen. This is, I think, going back to the, so you can look at either the person, the contract or assignment. So you see in the request type, you can indicate what type of file upload result you're looking at. So if you want to look at just your assignments, you can get rid of the other two and the display on the screen will change. If there are any errors or things that you need to look at, it should be noted then on the screen. And you can go into trying to fix those. And that, again, is found over here on the results under the work with staff data. There is a staff list under that same menu where you can get a list of all of your staff that you have uploaded into the system, and that could be a very valuable tool in trying to verify data, do data quality check, make sure that you've sent things up correctly. The screen can be downloaded into a spreadsheet if that's helpful. You can sort these columns if that's helpful as well. And then if you do find something that's wrong, you can go into the edit feature and go in and fix it, or you can do another file upload with the data fixed. Either way works. I would suggest, again, if you're going to do one way or the other, I would stick with that way, because let's say you do an update on the screen using the screen in the tool, and then you do another data upload later, you could accidentally overwrite the changes you made on the screen with the data upload, and you might get confused. It might create more work for yourself. So if you are going to use one method, I would suggest sticking with that, just to make sure you don't accidentally delete something you've done inadvertently and then maybe causing some more work for yourself. Then when all the staff data has been entered, I believe the deadline is the week after the student data snapshots. It's going to be sometime around December 19th, I believe. The data will be submitted by everyone, and then it'll go into the audit process. And the teacher licensing team at DPI will go through all of the data received from all of the school districts and all the charter schools and other agencies that are required to submit their staff data. And the basic things they're looking for are, is any position that requires a license being taught by someone or occupied by someone who has that proper license. And that's a process that can take some time. Once the audit is complete, you will be notified of that. And if you do have any audit errors, they'll indicate those in the audit. Then you're given the opportunity to go and do another round of data submission and correct any errors that you might have. And then the final certification takes place in the spring. And then once the data has been finalized, then it'll actually be published on the website to the public and also reported to the U.S. Department of Ed and anywhere else that it needs to be reported. So this is an example of where you can review your audit results and make corrections. So if you notice up here, validate staff data is the menu item that they chose for that. And there is also a reports and validations menu. There are some reports that you can look at that might help you when you're looking at your data to make sure that it's accurately reported. If there are problems, there is a checklist on the very landing screen of the WISE staff application. And if there are problems with the data, there are some red marks on that checklist. And you can click on the indicator in that checklist and go right to the place in the WISEdata app where you can look at the problem and fix it. So that is a handy feature. It eliminates a lot of browsing through screens that you might otherwise have to do. So but these reports can also help you at a glance maybe check and make sure that that your data is looking good. And then this would be addressing the final certification that I mentioned that happens in the spring. And when you sign off on it, then you're finally, you sign off on the preliminary one as well, but when you sign off on the final agency certification, you're saying that all the data is correct and that it's ready to be submitted to the federal agency and ready to be published. And like I said, there are some much more detailed and in-depth WISE staff trainings that I encourage you to take advantage of that the 12 CSIS put on, and those are coming up in October, and they are very valuable for anyone at your school who's going to be doing the WISE staff data collection. So if you have the opportunity to take advantage of one of those, I highly recommend it. We do, of course, take your help tickets on WISE staff issues as well here at DPI. So if you do get stuck on something or just can't figure something out, let us know. We're more than happy to help. And then also, we do have those WISE staff user group webinar calls that will be coming up weekly beginning in October that can not only bring you up to speed on things that might have changed in the application or things like that, but also give you the opportunity to ask questions and get them answered. So sometimes the WISE staff questions can take a little longer to answer, and the reason for that is that sometimes, depending on the question, we may need to run it by the DPI teacher licensing team. And so if it's a question that that needs an answer from the licensing team, we may need to do that, but we try to keep you abreast of the situation all the way along the line and say, yep, we're waiting for an answer from licensing, or maybe they'll ask to just take the ticket from us and they'll deal with you directly, just depending on the situation. But typically the staff questions, if they are licensing related, can take a little bit longer than the student questions. So not always, but sometimes. So now we're going to shift gears again and go from staff data back to student data, and we're going to start talking about those snapshots that I mentioned towards the beginning. And so again, the reason that we take a data snapshot is that because the data that's coming from your student information system can change frequently, we need to have a point in time where everyone agrees that we're going to take the data that we're going to use for reporting purposes. And so this year we've chosen December 10th as that date, and we have the 2018-19 school year, what we call year-end data. that will be in that snapshot. So we're going to be looking at things like completion, high school completion, attendance, discipline, anything that needed to be calculated at the end of the school year will be taken in that 2018-19 year-end snapshot. Roster is included in that, by the way. And then we will also take the third Friday of September and October 1 child count tallies for the 2019-20 school year in that snapshot. So that's a lot of data, and what we typically do at DPI leading up to that snapshot is a data quality initiative where we run all kinds of reports internally, and we get together with the different DPI teams and areas that are stewards of that data. So for example, the special ed team, perhaps the team that works on the report cards, the teams that deal with English language learner data, things of that nature, all the different types of data that we're looking at, and we have them review it. And if we come across data that we think is wrong or looks kind of funny or perhaps doesn't compare with previous years or with trends of previous years, things of that nature, we will reach out to you and say, hey, could you take a look at this and just make sure it's correct and make sure that you don't need to make some corrections before the snapshot. And we do the best, obviously we can't catch everything, but we do the best that we can to help you make sure that the data is in the best possible condition it can be in when we take that snapshot. And one of the tools that we have to help you with that data quality is WISE- for districts. It is a very robust tool with a lot of different features, but the one feature we're going to talk about now is the snapshot dashboards. And we'll get into just a little bit of some of the other dashboards. There is a multitude of other uses for the WISE- for districts tool. And just as there was with WISE staff, there are trainings that the CSIS can provide to you for WISE- that you might want to take advantage of if you want to get more in-depth into the tool, but we're going to concentrate more on just the snapshot part of things here. So to get started, just to even back up a little bit further from this slide, as I mentioned before with all the other tools that are used with WISEdata, you're going to have a user role assigned to you for WISE- by whomever at your school is the WISE- application administrator. And if you don't know who that is, we can look that up for you at DPI. But you aren't able to use the tool until you actually have been assigned a user role to use it. So that is the first step. Then you would log into WISE- using the secure home menu, so the same way that we would get into WISE-ID or WISE Data Portal. And once you're into the tool, there is an icon that looks like that little checkerboard that's in number 2 there. That is kind of the menu bar or the way to get going. And you would select snapshots from that menu. And then you would look at you'd select whichever snapshot dashboard you want. So there's a snapshot dashboard for basically every different data quality topic. So if you're looking at verifying data for third Friday of September, you choose the third Friday of September snapshot dashboard, or there's one for October 1. There's roster, whatever data you'd be looking at, that would be the dashboard that you would want to select then next. And then you have a filter data tab where you can start filtering the data. So we'll talk about that. So this is what the WISE- for districts tool looks like. This is that checkerboard that we mentioned. And this is where you'd select snapshots from that checkerboard menu. And once you've done that, then here are the different dashboards that I mentioned. So if you were going to look at third Friday of September or October 1, that attendance, whatever it might be. There is a roster and career education snapshot dashboard that will be in place. If it isn't already, it will be in place for you to be able to look at that data as well. And the data warehouse team is constantly making new dashboards for this. So again, if you have a suggestion for an improvement on the way it works, or if you would like to see an additional dashboard, submit that feedback, as I mentioned before, on the feedback site, and the developers definitely take that feedback seriously, and that would be something that they would look at. The filter data button then is what you're going to need to use if you're going to want to filter down the data. So what I mean by that is it's a cross-tab format. It's going to build a chart for you, but it needs some information to start with. So obviously for district, it's going to be the name of either your, if you're a standalone, it's just going to be the name of your school. That should already be filled in. But if you're a charter school that's part of a district, you're probably going to have to then choose the school from the school section there, and make sure that you're looking at only your school and not data from elsewhere in the district. And then if you want to, you can sort the data by more demographic type information. So if you want to look at a specific grade level, for example, or a specific disability status, or whatever the case may be, you can drill into it very, very detailed if you need to do that. When you do select your filters, you're going to see like a breadcrumb list at the top that shows all the filters that are in place. This is important because as you start applying filters and then looking at other data, if you forget to take one off, the totals can look really, really wrong if you have a filter applied and you don't realize that it's applied, or if you think one is applied and it isn't. So it's a good thing to check this list to see what filters are applied to make sure that you're looking at the data you think you're looking at. One of the very first things you'll see at the top of any of the dashboard, snapshot dashboards, is a data quality indicator. And this is kind of a high level, is my data good or not type of an indicator. It's not foolproof, but it is a very good way for you to check and see if things are looking good or bad just at a glance. So there's an informational type indicator. So in the example here, it has the 4-year graduation rate. You can get a quick look at the topic at hand. So if your graduation rate, you pop in there and your graduation rate says 0, or it says 20%, then you say, oh, maybe that's something I need to take a look at. Maybe there's some data there that I need to change in my information system to get that to report properly. So those are the informational indicators. Caution indicators show data that may have an error or may be questionable. It also could be valid. It's just maybe not looking exactly the way the system thinks it should look. So you probably will want to definitely take a look at that and see, just to make sure that everything was reported correctly. And if it wasn't, you can have the opportunity to make that change. School with no high school completion is an example that's given there, and it indicates 1, and it says caution. So maybe you do have, maybe there, in this case, it's an example for a school district. So maybe, I know obviously this isn't a great example for a charter school, but if a school district had a school that had 12th graders in it, but they didn't for some reason expect those 12th graders to graduate, they could potentially have that flagged as a 1 there. But it could also be wrong. They probably, in most situations, probably would expect to have graduates if they have 12th graders in their school, so they would probably want to take a look at that. Then there's a goal 0 indicator, and that is data that is likely to be in error or questionable, and it is suggested that that data be reviewed more closely for sure to make sure whether or not it's correct. So for example, if you have a 0 number of students counted in 3rd grade in September, that is probably a mistake. So you'd probably want to take a look at that data and see why none of those kids were counted. So those are just some very high level indicators that are at the top of the database page, or I'm sorry, the dashboard page. When you are in the dashboard, it is in a cross-tab format, which allows you to kind of build a chart. Down the left-hand side are all the different available data topics. So whether that be a demographic category or a data element, something like that. You can click and drag those either into the row or column of the chart and start building a chart. So as you can see in the example then on the right, they've taken gender and grade level and made those as rows in the chart. And then they've taken their third Friday of September special ed data element, ELL status, and economic disadvantage status, and made that as a column of their chart. So then they can see how many of those types of students there are in each gender and grade breakdown. You can make these charts as detailed or as simple as you want them, depending on what you're trying to verify. Again, going back up, the filters that are up at the top in that red are being applied to this chart. So if things are not looking the way you think they should look in your chart, go up and check your filters and make sure that you have the right filters applied. So for example, the attending, maybe you want only students you're accountable for and not students who are attending. That's the only real thing I can see in this example, but you'd want to make sure that this filter selection is giving you the right data that you want displayed in your chart down here. This data is also exportable, so if you wanted to send this out to a PDF or an Excel file and compare that with a report from your information system, you can do that too if that's easier for you. Now, if you'll notice, there's a green and a purple. So if we go back up here, we have a current view and a snapshot view. What the heck is that? Well, current view, represented by the green, is going to be the data, and we call it the current data, but WISE- can only read the data that was in WISEdata yesterday. The reason for that is if you remember at the very beginning when I gave the high-level overview, when the WISEdata portal data is sent over to the data warehouse, and that's the data where the snapshot is taken from, that data warehouse is the same database that WISE- reads to give you the display on the snapshot dashboards. That transfer of data from WISEdata portal to data warehouse only happens once every night. So when you're looking at WISE- snapshot dashboards, you're looking at what was in WISEdata yesterday. And that's important because if you've made any data uploads or changes today, you're not going to see those on your snapshot dashboard right away. You're only going to see them reflected in that tomorrow. So that's something we want to make sure that everyone understands so that you're not really concerned that you have a lot of data errors that you might not really have because you're looking at yesterday's data and you've already made the changes. So, but that's a little less than ideal, but it is the way that that needs to work with the way that the technology is. So when we say current view, that's what we mean. We mean current as of yesterday in WISEdata. But snapshot view then gives you the opportunity to take the data that you have submitted for this school year and compare it with the data as of the last snapshot. So when you're looking at third Friday of September counts, for example, for the 1920 school year, you can compare the data on a side-by-side screen, green versus purple, of what your third Friday of September data was in the 2018-19 snapshot. And that might help you either verify that the data is correct or help you with troubleshooting some errors if there happen to be some problems with the totals. So that's just one other kind of handy method that this dashboard allows you to do, because you don't always know when you're looking at stuff for the current school year, well, what did that look like last year? Well, now you can find that out and you can look at it side by side and you can say, oh, look, last year at third Friday of September, I had 16 ELL students, and this year I have only one. Is that a problem? Do I really only have one? Do I need to look at that? Is my data submission often in that data category? So it could be a way, just one way for you to check data quality and see that what you've submitted for the upcoming snapshot, it kind of compares with what was in the last snapshot. Now, obviously, things change, and it might not be an exact way to do it, but it could be a very helpful tool. So that is designated, the snapshot view is designated in the purple, whereas the current view with yesterday's WISEdata is in the green view. There are some other dashboards that are outside of the snapshot dashboards that might be helpful to you in verifying your data quality as well. And specifically, trend data is very helpful. So if you're looking at the 1920 school year, let's just say this graph is a little different with the years, and the high school completers is going along, and then all of a sudden for the most recent school year, it's way down to 25%. Well, just at a glance, you can look at that and say, whoa, something must be up with my data for that school year. Consequently, if it would be way higher, that might be an indication to look at too. So that's a way that you can kind of eyeball your data and see, does it compare with the trend of the previous few school years? You can find this, by the way, if we go back to our menu, if you use this checkerboard icon, and you can choose the, instead of choosing snapshots, you can choose the data topic that you want to look at. So whether it be enrollment or attendance or whatever, you can do that from that little checkerboard menu up at the top. Another way that trend data is helpful is when you're looking at dropouts. Dropouts are a big, a lot of times, question. The rules and the law that surrounds who gets counted as a dropout and who doesn't can sometimes get confusing. So a lot of times the first step is to look at WISEdash and see, well, just who do I have calculated as a dropout for that school year? You can click right on the bar in the graph, and it'll bring up a list of every single student that makes up that data point in the graph. You can look at that list and you can say, what? Jane Smith wasn't a dropout. She transferred to public, to whatever school. And then you can go in and either fix that information in your information system and resubmit it, or open a help ticket with us if you have a question about it, whatever the case may be. But it's a great way for you to check that just by getting that list of the students that are making up of that list of dropouts and checking them one by one and making sure that it's accurate. And then comparing it to the statewide rate over on the right might be helpful too to you. Attendance rate, same type of thing. You can check to see if your current attendance rate as submitted is in line with your recent trend data. Another thing that we look at a lot of times in data quality initiatives is 100% attendance. While that's not impossible, it's usually considered to be improbable. So if a school has submitted a 100% attendance for all their students, a lot of times that will be one of the things that causes us to reach out when we do our data quality initiative, just to make sure that there wasn't a problem in the information system or something with sending all that attendance data in. So that's something that would definitely show up on here as well. And again, also you can compare this with the statewide average to see how that compares, if that's helpful to you. And at the top of each of these slides, it tells you what you would need to choose using the checkerboard. You go to your topics, main, attendance, dropouts, and attendance rate by subgroup to get this particular graph. There are, like I said, tons of graphs and tons of information in there, so it might be helpful to kind of use this as your guide on how to get there. Absenteeism is another thing that is looked at, and this is something, again, that you can benefit from perhaps by looking at a trend. And again, if you click on the data point, no matter which of these graphs you're looking at, when you click on the data point, it's going to pop up with a list of students that make up that data point. And you're going to be able to see, oh, look, so-and-so shouldn't be on this list. Maybe I need to go in and make sure that their attendance has been reported properly, that sort of thing. So one thing that sometimes comes up is when a student attends a field trip, they're not considered absent, for example, but maybe they were accidentally counted absent for, all their field trips that they took. So you need to go back in and make sure that they weren't considered absent for WISEdata purposes for those days. Just a example to throw out there on how that can be fixed. The other caveat is that in order to see the list of students pop up when you click on the data point, you have to have the proper WISE-security role assigned to you. So if you have the role that's called Student Summary Analyst, you can only see the data in aggregate, and you will not, unfortunately, be able to see that data pop up in the window to see the list of students. So, but if you have Student Detail Analyst or Economic Indicator Analyst, you will be able to see that information. So that would be a question to ask your WISE- application administrator if they can change your role if you don't have the proper role to see that. Another one that's usually tricky for people, or a lot of times is anyway, is graduation cohorts. A lot of times we get questions about why is so-and-so in this cohort, or how did it get calculated this way? So this is a way that you can see in a chart form, how many students you have in each cohort depending on the school year and the cohort year. And so basically a cohort will begin for a student once they enter grade 9, and then the system will expect them to graduate 4 years from that time. And if they don't, then they may find themselves in one of the 5, 6, 7-year cohorts. Excuse me. And so a lot of times that's confusing because the student will graduate eventually, but they didn't graduate within 4 years, so it might put them into a different graduation cohort. Same with students that graduate early. That can cause a little confusion as well. Even though they graduate maybe in 3 years, they're still going to be counted as a graduate in their 4-year cohort. So it's kind of confusing sometimes when you're looking at these tables. So if you do have some questions about why a student was included in a certain cohort, open up a health ticket and let us know, and we'll research it for you. If it's one of those school years that's still open, so remember I showed you we have right now in WISEdata, we can go back to the 2017-18 school year and make updates. If it's in one of those school years that's still open for you to edit, you can still make the change and fix it. And it will change in the WISE-. If it is from an earlier school year, we have a process that you'll need to go through for what we call a data errata, and we'll get into that before we end here. Some important notes about the snapshot dashboards for people, especially who may have used them in the past. Right now, the third Friday of September and October 1 child count snapshot dashboards, they include all students enrolled over those dates, whether or not their count inclusion flag is set to yes or no. And the reason that that's important is that you now have the ability to look at all students enrolled over those dates. And if there are students who do not have their count inclusion flag set to yes, but they should, you can see them now on one of those cross tabs and be able to perhaps better troubleshoot why they were sent with a value of no. Before, the dashboard was set up to only show the students whose count inclusion flag was set to yes. And this was some of the feedback we received, so we made the change based on that feedback, that it's more helpful to be able to see all students yes and no, and then do your troubleshooting from there. So that's why that change was made. If you have questions about the data elements that are used in determining the count inclusion, those are linked to from this slide, both the third Friday data element and the October one. And if you want to see the total count of students that will be included in the third Friday count or the October 1 count, then you have to look at those students who have a value of yes. So that's an important point too. So if you go back to the crosstab example, so we would have a crosstab report set up here, and maybe we would have our rows be TFS flag yes, TFS flag no, and then maybe at the top we could have grade level, and we'd be able to see in each row, you know, who the yeses were and who the nos were. Just like with these, where you can click on the data point and see the list of students that makes up that data point, you can do the same thing on the crosstab. So if you want to know who all these students are in this total, who are these two male second grade students who are economically disadvantaged, click on that link and you'll get the pop-up that shows the students that make up that data point. So it's the same thing in the crosstab. So if you were looking at your yes and no counts and you wanted to see who are the students that are flagged as no for third Friday of September, you could click on the no, or click on the total for the no's in this chart, and you'd be able to see the list of that group of students. And if there were some on there that are flagged as no in error, you'd know who those were you needed to change in your information system. This same type of information would apply to the October 1 child count for special ed students. So again, if you had students in that no category that were showing up, but they should be under the yes category, you could investigate that by popping up that list of students. I will mention that with special ed, basically the special ed information comes through on a record that's called an SSEPA, or a SEPA, we sometimes say, and it's tied to the IEP and some other information. So if you have a third-party special ed vendor like Seeds or Oasis, those are the two that are certified to use WISEdata, you may have an extra step in verifying some data because you may need to check that system as well as your student information system. If you have the products Skyward or Infinite Campus, they have a feature built in where if you have your IEPs in a work in progress status, or what they call unlocked, if they're being worked on by someone in the special ed area, that student will not show up as special ed in WISEdata. So if you are looking to have that student counted as special ed in the October 1 child count, and they're not showing up on the snapshot dashboard, and they're in that no category when you look at the crosstab, check to see if their IEPs are unlocked or in a work in progress state, and that could be likely the reason why they're displaying that way. What we usually advise is right before the snapshot, maybe the day before even, is to make sure that all the IEPs are locked and are not in a work in progress state so that we can make sure when the snapshot is taken, all the special ed data comes through that we would want to come through. And I don't know if there are other vendor products that operate in that similar way, but I know that Skyward and Infinite Campus do. And so if you are one of those two, a customer of one of those two, you definitely will want to check that, but it can't hurt to check with your vendor no matter who it is, just to make sure they don't have something similar in their product as well. When you are in WISEdata portal, we're going to backtrack a little bit here, but it still has to do with snapshot. Someone at your school is going to be required to acknowledge each data category in the snapshot, indicating that they understand the responsibilities that they have for reporting the data, and that to the best of their ability, they've made every effort to make sure that that data was reported correctly. It doesn't have to be the same person for every category. It can be the same person for every category. That would depend just basically on how your school is set up and how duties are assigned and that sort of thing. The very first time you log into WISEdata portal every school year, you're going to have to not only enter your contact information, you're going to have to also enter your snapshot acknowledgement information. So what that means is that the very first time you log into WISEdata portal, you're going to have to indicate your email address and phone number and whether you are a primary, secondary, or generic user. Primary and secondary would be the people that would be primarily in charge of the data and would be potentially contacted by other agencies if they would need to be, contacted by DPI if we would need to reach out to you, that sort of thing. A generic user would be a person who is just kind of maybe doesn't have a level of responsibility that's high up, but would be in there working every day and would need to use the tool. When you're looking at the acknowledgement portion, obviously not everyone that uses WISEdata portal is going to be in a position where they would need to be the person acknowledging the data collection. So you can choose the option in there that you do not acknowledge or you don't know if you're the person, that sort of thing. You do have to put something in though, or it won't let you pass the screen and it won't let you see your work. So there is definitely the need to put something in there. Excuse me. And then that is the first time that you log in. Once you have completed that information successfully, then that shouldn't bother you again until the next school year. And this is some more information about the acknowledgement. So one of the additions that's new this school year, if you've used this in the past, is that now the acknowledgement states that you will use WISE- prior to the snapshot to verify grad rate, dropout rate, attendance rate, and future grad cohorts. And that is a requirement that somebody at the school make that acknowledgement. One thing I would like to talk about before we go into the resources that we have for you again is data errata letters. So if we get, hopefully this won't be something you ever need to do. But if the snapshot has happened, and after that snapshot, you realize that some of the data that you submitted was incorrect, there is a process that you can go through to make a notation in the, on the website that the data was submitted incorrectly. Once the snapshot has happened and the data is published, it can't be changed, but there can be a notation made in the system that you have discovered an error in the data and you've let us know about it. So the first step in the process is for you to correct the data in your information system. And then the second step in the process would be to submit a data errata letter. And there's a instruction page on the DPI website about this, and who you would send it to and what information should be included. It's very important that in the data errata letter you do not include any personally identifiable information for any student, because this letter is published on the website for the public to look at. So we definitely don't want to have any private PII in the data errata letter. But basically what you'll be stating is you'll send it in on the school letterhead and you'll say, we determined that the number of graduates we submitted for the 18-19 school year was incorrect. We submitted 13. The total should have been 15. We discovered this error after publication, something like that. Then when the public is looking at that report on the website, whether it be in the WISE- public data portal, for example, they will see a little icon that says there's data errata that pertains to this data category. And when they click on that, they'll be taken to a page where they can look at the letter that you sent in and see, oh, I see, there really should have been 15 graduates that year. I understand. So unfortunately, while we can't go back and change the data once it's been published, we can offer you this method to at least let the public know that the data was published incorrectly and that you have since determined that it should read differently. So we do have that process available. We call it, again, data errata, and you can find that on the instructions of how to go about submitting one of those on the DPI website. Another reminder here about our weekly user group calls every Tuesday at 1:30. We really do encourage your participation in those because not only will you hear the information that we have to give you about WISEdata, WISEID, Career Tech Ed, and Career College Ready, and also WISE-, but you'll have the opportunity to ask questions or listen to other agencies' questions about the problems they're having resolving errors, or the problems they're having trying to figure out how to submit a certain type of data, that sort of thing. Other things that come up frequently are problems that maybe a SIS vendor might be having with sending data. So if one of the SIS vendors is having a difficulty sending roster, for example, that might be discussed in the call. And if you use that same SIS vendor, you would know, basically what a workaround might be, or what you need to know to go about submitting that data. So it's very, very informational, and something that you probably will want to take advantage of, definitely. A lot of these other links on the list here on this slide we've talked about before, but some of them are worth mentioning on their own, especially the snapshot preparation guidance. That's the top one on there. That is going to give you a crash course in the snapshot dashboards that I just went through, and all of the other tasks or bullet points that you need to cover when you're preparing for a snapshot. So that's a really good one to look over. We also have the WISE- for Districts Quick Start video noted there, which is really nice. If we have any users who are here from previous school years, the WISE- tool has changed over the summer. It went to version 2.0, so it looks different than it used to. And that might take some getting used to if you are used to the old version. So that tutorial is a quick little 3-minute video describing how to navigate around in WISE-. And if you've never used it before, it's helpful as well, because it'll show you how to get around. The snapshot dashboards didn't change dramatically from the two products, but the other dashboards really did. So that's a really good feature, or a really good video to look at. And there's a how-to guide there linked as well. If you have the need, you can look at the WISE- frequently asked questions, and each data topic has an about the data page that really in-depth explains what you're looking at when you're looking at that dashboard. Where did the data come from? How were these fields calculated? If there's a calculation involved, when was it loaded? All that kind of stuff. So it's very helpful sometimes to look at those about the data pages. If you're concerned about data privacy, or if you have employees at your school maybe that you would like to train on data privacy, that link will be helpful. We have all kinds of resources out there about how you can keep private data private, what the importance of that is, and then materials that you can use to train your staff or train your personnel if you would need to do that. So that's a very handy resource as well. And then we already mentioned the Google Plus community, but that's a good one to get involved in too, like I mentioned before, for that peer-to-peer or users helping users feature. If you need help, we all need help. You can open a help ticket with us anytime. The links are there. They both kind of go to the same place, but there's two different links. They're kind of broken out, whether you have a sort of a login or ASM, I can't log in or I don't have the right user role type of an issue, or if you have any type of a anything related to WISE, basically, you can get to us with either of those links. But a lot of the questions they come to what we call WISE support first, which is a level 1 support, and then if the question can't be answered there, they'll go to level 2. And then if the level 2 can't answer the question, sometimes they'll go to another DPI team to get an answer, or there might be, if it's a really involved situation, there might be a little bit of a delay to get your answer. But what we try to do is to at least get you a response within 24 business hours. So even if it's just to say, sorry, I don't have the answer right now, but I'm looking into it, we at least try to respond so that you know that we got it and that it's not just sitting out there in limbo or something. So hopefully you will at least get that response when you send a ticket. Obviously, as we get closer to snapshot time, the volume of help tickets gets higher and higher. So if you do submit the request to have a DPI person call you, sometimes we can't always do that right away if we're, getting to 250 help cases a day, but we will definitely do our best. So just to throw that out there, but usually that's not an issue. Then we have the question slide. So you can click into the agenda from this slide if you're following along with us and get to a place where you can type in a question if you're out there virtually, or we can take questions from the folks in the room if anybody has any questions. If there's anything you'd like me to go over again, or I didn't cover well enough, or didn't cover at all and you're wondering about, please let me know. The forum is wide open. If there's any here I need to read. I think we've had all those questions. So I'll leave it open for another little bit if there's anything you can think of. If anybody that's here in the room would like to, if you have specific questions about, errors that you have in your WISEdata portal, or something that you would want someone to look at individually, we can do that for you here, no problem at all. I feel like an umpire who's trying to determine whether he should call the game on account of rain or not. I don't want to end too soon if somebody thinks of something, but I don't want to waste everybody's time by sitting here either. So maybe I'll just let go for another minute or two, and if nobody has anything, well. And again, I'll talk about the feedback. If you do have some feedback for us that you have a suggestion for an improvement to the software or to process or something like that, it's feedback.dpi.wi.gov, or there's an icon in the lower right of the application when you're in like WISEdata portal, for example, or one of the apps. You can click right on the feedback icon. And you can either suggest your own feedback, or you can vote on a suggestion that was left by someone else. And the development teams look at those and they determine their workload based on who's voted on what issue and how many times. So that is really something that is looked at, and changes are definitely made to the system based on feedback. So very important. Can you do that address again? Sorry. As for the address again, it's feedback.dpi.wi.gov. And then if you think of a question right when we end, if you're on the way home or whatever, and you think of a question, feel free to open a help ticket with us anytime. That's what we're here for. So I guess we will call the game at 12:13 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope it was helpful, and let us know if you'd like to see a training like this in the future, if you have ways we can improve it, if there are things that you thought were going to be covered that weren't, or we covered too much and you found unhelpful. Whatever the case may be, please let us know. We will structure our future sessions based on what people want and what people have told us they need. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful 2019-20 school year and a great weekend, or week. Yeah, I wish it was the weekend. Thanks.